We've been going now for almost 2 hours, and what I would like to hear very quickly from each of you is we're going to have an opportunity for much more input on ANILCA, on the promises made to our state by the federal government, and ways that we can get back into balance. If you could provide 2 key priorities, 2 things that you think could help us address how we return to a level of balance, I'd like to hear them. And I'm going to limit you to just 2, but you'll have an opportunity to weigh in for more. And most of you have provided in your written testimony a whole series of them. So I'm going to have you pick between your favorites and offer up 2 of the suggestions that you think that we should be turning to from the perspective here in Washington, D.C. to help address the promises made to Alaska. Governor Walker.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I come from local government. I believe local government is the purest form of government because it's closest to the people. I think the further away from the people decisions are made, the more challenging those decisions become. I would love to see, I know we've had contingents come to Alaska from Washington, from Congress to view our beautiful state. And I would welcome that again. So I think that's one thing would be to have them come to Alaska, to show them our opportunities in Alaska, why we would be the 8th largest, most energy-rich nation in the world if we were a nation rather than a state. So that would be one thing. And secondly, I think that the agencies, Congress makes the laws, agencies apply regulations and carry them out. We need to have a relationship with the agencies such that they truly understand the impact of what they're doing. And so I'd like to add that have the agencies come up, not just during when the Silvers are running in Seward or Valdez, or when the Copper River Reds are in Cordova, but during the winter. During the winter, when our rural areas are trying to, meet their energy needs and see a side of Alaska that we deal with that isn't during a particular height of a tourist season. So I'd like there to be some way that they could see the other part of Alaska. We don't get a lot of congressional delegation to it, I know, because of the timing, but I'd like them to see the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say.
Well, we know that in February in Bethel, we are looking to have a field hearing out there looking at some of the energy issues that we face in the state, and I'm hopeful to be able to entice several of our colleagues for an Alaska winter tour. And on your first point about getting lawmakers up and understanding Alaska, as you know, there was legislation, the ANWR wilderness legislation that was introduced yesterday. I had a colleague of mine who happens to hail from the East Coast back here, and he's been to Alaska before. He's been out to the ANWR area, but he asked to meet with me, and we met for close to an hour, where he could just ask questions about trying to understand a little bit more of Alaska's economy. I've been here in the Senate now for almost 13 years, and I have to tell you, I was really quite struck by the fact that a colleague, before he signed on to legislation that related to one person's state, that he came and asked for perhaps a more thorough review. Good news is that he hasn't signed on to that legislation yet. Senator Coghill, your suggestions.
Thank you, Senator. ANILCA is Alaska-specific. Our Constitution certainly was authorized by Congress, so there's a partnership. And if we don't do something to make that partnership work better, I think we have failed both the federal national interest and Alaska's interest. And so I think the Land Use Council has to go in either reconstituted or reinstated in whatever way I think Congress can help us tie us together, because since it is so Alaska specific, the impacts are great. since it's a national interest, we need to understand those national interests. I think Alaska's heart, as said here previously, have been conservation-minded but production-oriented, and I think those are both well taken. And I think we've been good trustees on both accounts. We probably have some of the best records for developing areas in kind of the greenfield operations in the world. And so we have a lot to be really pleased about. The other thing is, I think Congress should go back and lift those 17D withdrawals, take the advice from BLM, because that will start clearing up title. And when you come to land issues, if you have title questions, then you can't move forward. So those two issues probably would be key in my mind.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Arnaud.
Yes, one of the first things that the Outdoor Council would like to see would be, defining who has the authority and where. That as far as the Submerged Land Act, and as far as access to navigable waters, that because of the large size of Alaska and the conservation system units, that those waterways were the transportation corridors just for commerce. And that how many times we've litigated and tried to get litigation settled to determine that where each land manager has the authority, that clearing that up would be extremely important. The second, would be back to that nothing in ANILCA diminishes the state's authority to manage fish and game. That one, the controversy between preservation and conservation is going to remain until the state can go ahead and manage the resource as the state constitution allowed them to.
Thank you. And we haven't talked much about the sturgeon case, but I think we as Alaskans recognize the significance of this case before the Supreme Court coming up this next year, and what that is going to mean in terms of more clear definitions regarding who has that authority. Ms. Brown, your recommendations.
Thank you again for the invitation today. I really appreciate it. I think maybe the most important thing that can come out of this is recognizing that not all lands can be managed the same way. Alaska owns as much land as the entire mass of California, Washington, and Oregon combined. And we need to use the conservation opportunities that are given to us by ANILCA to address the climate change threat and to help Alaska move to a sustainable energy economy. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Mr. Kindred.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to speak in platitudes, but I think the common themes we see when we deal with federal agencies are a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when we are dealt a decision that is patently unfair and oftentimes patently illegal, we have to engage in years of litigation to get a remedy, and even that remedy in and of itself isn't particularly satisfying. And I often think about the litigation that I'm involved in, and at the end of the day, there really isn't any accountability. There's no skin in the game for these federal agencies. Even if 6 years later the Ninth Circuit rules in our favor, they just go back and they do something that's slightly different, and we begin again. And I don't know exactly the mechanism or the medium by which we can hold these federal agencies to be more accountable, but I think if there was a manner that was short of litigation but that had some concrete remedy, I think that would be beneficial. And the other is transparency, in the sense that there are so many layers of federal regulations now and so many different laws that apply that it's often difficult to engage in a discourse with a federal agency and get a true answer as to what they're doing, when they're going to do it, and that creates a great deal of uncertainty. And from the members that I represent, uncertainty is toxic. And so if there was more transparency and we have a better understanding of why federal agencies were doing it and who to speak to and had some mechanism to have that conversation, that would also be beneficial.
Thank you. That's important. Ms. Seidman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would look for clarification that state managers are, and I say at least on an equal level with their federal counterparts when it comes to wildlife management decisions that affect both federal and state lands and users, and all users. And the second one would be to make sure that the federal managers adhere to ANILCA's requirements for management of wildlife that conserves all wildlife in balance, and that would include a balancing between predator and prey species.
Thank you. Mr. Tangent.
Yes, Madam Chairman. If you're going to reduce it down to 2 points, there are only 2 points here, actually. First of all is no more, and second of all is access. And so with regard to no more, we have to find a way to ensure that the land managing agencies in Alaska understand and are committed to and are held accountable to the precepts in the statute that there will be no more lands studied for, contemplated, advanced, and anything else for the restricted access and uses. And to be perfectly clear, I am not particularly concerned about the existing conservation system units. I think that what we're concerned about is the public domain lands and the Forest Service lands, which are now being thrown into the bucket. If, in fact, there's concerns with regard to how the Park Service manages it, those lands are already tied up, so to speak. But I think that the second point, the second bookend with regard to this is access. And access comes in a variety of flavors, obviously. There's RS-2477 rights-of-way, there's submerged lands, et cetera, navigable waters. I would ask that Congress pass language similar to what it has in ANILCA concerning tentatively approved lands for statehood selections, that says that all navigable, all waters in Alaska, no matter how small the puddle is, are navigable unless the Department of the Interior can establish otherwise. Okay? And so therefore the lands are presumed navigable when the burden of proof is on the federal government to prove otherwise. In the same sense, the RS-2477, when it was repealed in FLIPMA, specifically acknowledged the fact that pre-existing rights-of-way would continue to be acknowledged. And I think that what we need to do is we need to say that the state of Alaska, as directed, identified a series of RS-2477 rights-of-way, and those RS-2477 rights-of-way by statute ought to be recognized as existing access corridors in the state of Alaska, and to put a little bit of a ribbon around it. They need to have a 50-foot from the center line right-of-way. They need to have borrow pits that are within what the people who want to develop those rights-of-way would consider reasonable access. So on those 2 bookends, no more and access, I think that we can solve all the problems that a lot of us have with ANILCA right now.